What is the deal with the term modular anyway? It comes from the mathematical term modulus, which means constant or absolute. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that sounds like the opposite of something that can be rearranged. Wait a minute. Isn't a Euro rack the spinning thing that you cut the Euro meat from? What is the deal with all the cables?
What is a modular synthesizer?
Modular typically means customizable, or a kit with various parts. There's a lot of clickbait you'll see for modular housing, which is a super fancy way of saying I live in a storage container. There are different types or formats of modular systems, and some of them are only compatible with themselves. But today, in 2018, 99% of modules are Eurorack. Buchla systems and surge systems are very cool, and they have many disadvantages and advantages over Eurorack. However, if you are prepared to buy a Buchla system, this video isn't going to teach you anything new. It's like explaining arithmetic to a mathematician. So for the record, everything I talk about in this video is Eurorack.
How is a modular synthesizer better than a regular synthesizer?
You get to not only design all of the components in your synthesizer, but you get to design a new synthesizer every time you make a modular patch, and you don't have to breathe in any solder fumes while doing it. If for some bizarre reason you only want 15 LFOs chained together going into one oscillator, and that's your synthesizer, you can do that with a modular. Actually, I'm kind of curious what that would sound like. Anyway, there are a lot of modules that do things that you simply cannot find in standalone synthesizers, like resonators, physical modelers, randomizers, advanced envelope generators, granular synthesis, all sorts of things. Modules use analog signals to talk to one another, and that's really, really important, and I'm going to get to that in another question. You can plug just about anything into anything else, which is very time-consuming in a really good way, and it allows you to make new sounds, new melodies, new things that you would never really thought of before.
Okay, how is a regular synthesizer better than a modular synthesizer?
Many standalone synthesizers have polyphony. Polyphony is when you can play more than one note at the same time. You can have polyphony on a modular synthesizer, but there's going to be a lot of compromises and workarounds to get to it. It's just not as easy as playing a C, E, G at the same time, and then bam, C major, the way that you get on a synthesizer. If you're not the kind of person who needs to walk around their studio and go analog, 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 then you could get a really good sounding poly synthesizer for a couple $100. There are a lot of standalone synthesizers that are incredibly customizable within the synthesizer's interface, but there's always a ceiling to that customization. Typically, in almost every case, when you go to the store and buy a standalone synthesizer, you don't have to come home and calibrate it and tune it. You have to do that with most modules. And before I do anything on my modular that is melodic, I have to tune the oscillators, and then every couple months, or if I change firmware on one of the modules, I have to recalibrate it. This is time consuming, and it's pretty cool to do the first couple times, but after a year or two, it becomes a chore. I will be the first to admit that there have been times where I've had a little spark of inspiration, and then I sat down in front of a modular synthesizer, realized I have to tune 4 different oscillators, and said, meh, got up and did something else.
Why are so many modular videos just showcasing awful noise?
This is a bit of a funny quandary, and here's the thing. If I want to show you how a lot of modules work, the best way to do it is by just putting the output into a sine wave oscillator, and that's going to sound like shit. And nowadays, when I watch videos like that, I think to myself, oh, that's really powerful. I would love to use that in a more subtle or different way, and I'm going to turn the volume down a little bit for the rest of the video. However, a lot of people unfortunately watch those videos and go, oh, this is what a modular synthesizer sounds like? Why would I want that? Make Noise Maths is a great example of this. It is a universally acclaimed must-have module that most people have nothing but excellent things to say about. However, If I am to describe how it works exactly to you, I need it plugged in to just an oscillator, and I need to make bleep bloops, and it's going to sound terrible. I use maths in 2/3 of my patches, but never to make sounds like that, because you can use it for modulating different things, and it's much more subtle and melodic. Finally, there is a small amount of modular synth enthusiasts who are just not musicians. They're into making noise and listening to noise, and that's fine. That seems like a pretty cool hobby, to play with synthesizers outside of a musical perspective.
Can you make good sounding music on a modular?
Absolutely you can. A lot of the background music you hear in this channel is a modular patch. I use it in my albums all the time. I even scored an award-winning educational film using nothing but modular and node-based synthesizers and sequencers. Off the top of my head, I could think of dozens of artists that use modular synths in absolutely beautiful sounding music.
What's the difference between CV gate and MIDI?
CV means control voltage, and it is voltage. Pitch is a lot of times -10 volts to +10 volts. A lot of modules use 0 to 5 volts for modulation, and you can always just use an attenuator module or an attenuator on an existing module to increase or decrease voltage to your liking. A gate is a trigger. It's extraordinarily simple. It's just 0 or 1. Is there a signal or is there not a signal? It typically triggers things or sequences things. So if I were to plug one end of the 3.5mm cable into something that needs a trigger, and then take the other end and go, yep, bink, like that, it would go zzz in the actual cable. The gate input that was listening would then say, ah, that's a trigger, and I would trigger it just with my finger. There are a million examples of dumb and creative ways to make gates. I could plug a microphone into a trigger input and then cough from across the room, and then that triggered something on the modular, and so on. Gates are extraordinarily powerful and simple at the same time, and there's really no limits on how slow or fast they can go. You can make that gate go so fast that it becomes a tone, like a square wave, and you could keep increasing that speed until it goes over 25,000 triggers per second, and at that point the tone isn't even in the range of human hearing anymore. MIDI has a resolution of 1/128th, meaning it has 128 values or options that you can select in the power of a signal. That is pretty decent. It is nowhere near as smooth sounding as infinite values. MIDI is limited by its baud rate. Voltage is limited by reality, the general laws of physics. That being said, if you don't care about these limitations, one MIDI cable equals 3,125 of these, depending on the usage. I kind of wonder what that would look like in comparison.
Why are modular synthesizers so expensive?
If we're talking about Eurorack, in the grand scheme of things, they're not really that expensive, especially if you are holding value in mind and you're okay with buying some things used. I get a lot of comments to videos and pictures saying, oh, I wish I had the money to get that. What they don't realize is the camera, lenses, microphones, all the things required to make the video probably have more value than the actual modular does. It's just that these things are kind of expensive in general. It's important to note that there are a lot of modules that I've seen where I look and I say, that's not worth the price for me, and then there's other ones where I say, I can't believe it's that cheap. And even if we stay in the world of synthesizers, a new standalone Waldorf quantum synth costs $4,300, whereas an entire module system with 17 different modules from AE I think costs $500 USD, somewhere around there. You could even go cheaper than that. If you don't mind getting your hands dirty and soldering a bit, you could order DIY kits that have PCBs and all the parts soldered together. This is even including most of Mutable Instruments stuff, which is actually excellent premium modules because all of their stuff is open hardware. I feel like the majority of electronic musicians, even modular owners, look at Eurorack as this ultimate money hole, and I don't agree with that. I think when you first buy one, you need more things. You're oh, I need another LFO. Oh, I need another filter. I need some effects on the end of this thing. But that has a limit. You eventually get all those things and you're comfortable with your system, and you don't really want to add on to it all that much unless a new module comes out that's really, really appealing, and then that's just like any other synthesizer. So So obviously, as with most hobbies, most of your expenses come in the first couple months. And in those first couple months, you're comparing those expenses to not having that hobby at all. But if you compare it to photography, guess what? Photography as a hobby is probably more expensive. And don't get me wrong, modular synthesis is not a cheap hobby to have. Fishing is a cheap hobby to have. But then again, I have 8 fishing poles. A lot of people buy a boat. I probably have $500 worth of lure. So I guess hobbies are just expensive.
If I'm spending all this money on a customizable synth, why not just save the money and make the modules myself?
This was actually my perspective 5 years ago, and I'm hearing more and more people casually saying it today. It's a bit of an arrogant thing to say when you break it down and think about what you're saying. Now, why would any idiot go to a car dealership when they could just go to AutoZone and buy $500 worth of parts and slap them together? Well, because there's a 99.999% chance that you don't know what the fuck you're doing. That's why. But hey, some modules are not that hard to sort out. A voltage-controlled oscillator, for example, is a easy to moderate electronics project. Okay, so let's build our own oscillator here. All we need is a faceplate, some potentiometers, a perf board, a dozen different resistors, capacitors, LEDs, an op amp, a 3.5 millimeter jack, and then power headers. Then we're going to need solder, a soldering gun, flux, solder remover, bench power supply, and an oscilloscope. Voila! You have something probably half as powerful as a $70 dope for VCO module. Like I said, this DIY everything perspective is the one that I initially had, and I put some time and energy into it, and I quickly learned that modular engineers and designers really know what they're doing. They not only have the knowledge and craft to make a good module, but they also have enough experience to make shortcuts and use specific types of productions to make that module more affordable for me and you, which ends up being cheaper than if you designed it yourself. I don't want to discourage people from designing their own modules. If you have a passion to design modules, you absolutely should learn how to do that and do it. But it is probably the most difficult, expensive, and frustrating way one could come to own their first modular synthesizer.
Why have a modular when stuff like PCV rack exists?
They are limited emulations of analog electronic systems. You're always going to have a CPU bogging you down, or an audio interface latency, or something like that. And 2/3 of the modules that I have in my system, for example, just can't be emulated on a computer or a digital synthesizer. They could try, but it's not going to sound anywhere close. I'm not saying this in a snobby way like an analog purist or an audiophile would. I'm mostly not even talking about sound, but I'm talking about the way that sounds can be modulated. I absolutely adore VCV Rack. I use Reactor and Pure Data and Max. I use them all the time, but they're just in a different ballpark from an analog system. I'm not even saying one's better or worse, they're just completely different. If you have a bunch of wood sitting around and you're comfortable with basic woodworking and you have some tools, then yeah, maybe you should make your own first case. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't. The rails aren't that expensive, and the rest of it you could pretty much get at Home Depot. You could actually get power modules that just have cables in the back that connect to all your other modules, and you plug that power into the wall. I started with a few Tip-Top Audio happy ending kits, and it's basically rails that fit perfectly inside a normal music or server rack case, and then a PSU and a power module. And it could just be added onto easily, and obviously buying a server rack or a music rack case is a lot cheaper than buying a modular rack case, so it's kind of easy to keep expanding. Also, just a tip that some people don't realize, if you have that Tip-Top Audio power supply module and you don't have enough power in it to power all the modules, but you still have the extra cables, you can just get a wall wart that has more amps, plug that into it, and you should be fine. It's always recommended to make sure that the thing's not heating up too much, but it should be fine. I've done it quite a lot, and I've gotten way more use out of one power module rather than having to buy a bunch with low amperage things that it ships with. Once you get beyond 2 or 3 rows, it stops being economically viable to buy more power supply modules, and you should just get an actual power system within your case, or get a case with a power system in it. This isn't that complicated, it's easy, but it's also potentially dangerous, so I'm gonna leave that for another video at a different time, or have you read about it from one of the many places on the internet that will tell you how to do it. I probably went through 3 or 4 different case configurations until I just built the 6-row case that I have now by scratch, and I've added a 7th add-on row to the top of that, and I'm about to add on an 8th, and I think I just need to build a new case, unfortunately. Even though I build power into the case, I still use some of those tip-top power supply modules so I could be a little more energy efficient and shut down the modules that don't need to be heated up.
I'm in. So what modules should I buy?
This is an incredibly valid question, and it's probably the one I get the most, and I myself once asked it. That being said, I hate answering it because I feel like if you take my advice, then you're robbing yourself of the experience of building your own synthesizer. We can head over to Modular Grid and make some example configurations, and I'm going to try and keep them under $1,200 or in that ballpark. All right, so what you're looking at is modulargrid.net, and this website is arguably the #1 website where you want to turn your ad block off, because it is extraordinarily valuable and free, and it tells you your power consumption. It gives you an idea of your space layout, of how many HP these use. HP is how we measure the size of modules. So for example, this thin one right here is 2 HP. Clouds here, let's take a look at that. Clouds is 18 HP, and this is the Mother 32, and this one is pretty big. This will be 60 HP. That's a lot. This is the tip-top audio case, which is a total of 84 HP. So first module here, this is your power supply. This is the Mother 32. This is an extra envelope that you can use with patching. And finally, we have clouds, which a lot of people at first use it as sort of an end-of-chain effects unit, because it has some pretty lush reverb and you could make delay with it, but it's also a granular oscillator or a granular sampler. Clouds is one of those unique modules that gets people into Eurorack in the first place. I've seen people make just little Eurorack cases that are almost guitar pedal size, where they just have inputs on the left, outputs on the right, and clouds in the middle. And while that's awesome, it's really the modulation that makes clouds special. And yeah, I mean, you could look up clouds online anywhere and see a million demos of it. It's an extraordinarily popular module. Anyway, Mother 32 has its own sequencer. It can create gates. It has an LFO. It has pretty much, your basics of a synthesizer or a modular synthesizer, and then it also has a MIDI in, so you can convert your MIDIs to CV and gate out to control these other things. And this is just a basic, probably your most basic musical modular synth setup that you could get. Total price new, $1,132. Total price used, you could probably snag this for about $900. This is a good generative starter kit. It has a Lifeforms SV1. It is a little similar to the Mother 32 in that it's semi-modular, and meaning that you can trigger it from MIDI and just have an output and just have a synthesizer, but at the same time you have all your outs and ins to hook it up to other modules. The SV1 versus the Mother 32, the SV1 doesn't have a sequencer. It does have MIDI in through, it comes with a little adapter, but this one has 3 oscillators. 2 of them are controllable. You have your LFO here, which is a triangle or square. That's on the Mother 32 as well. It has a sample and hold. Actually, I guess it has 4 oscillators because it has the subs. You have your ADSR, you have an amplifier, a splitter, which is an attenuator, and then you have your mult. And this you can make some pretty crazy sounds with. Mine is, I have one and I like it. I use it all the time. I have to adjust the tracking pretty frequently, but I also bought this right when it came out, and apparently they fixed a lot of things. So the ones that are coming out now are supposedly a lot better than the one I have, and I should send it in and have it, they'll repair it for free, or I guess update it for free, but I just am lazy. This is Maths, the modulation machine that is just incredible. The things you could do with this are endless. I could play with this all day. This is a quantizer, so you can basically send Maths into here to create some crazy modulation, send it into the quantizer and out, and then you will have notes. And this quantizer itself, if I'm correct, if I chose this right, yeah, this is just a pretty tiny quantizer that has 11 scales. And okay, so you can choose a lot of different quantizers. I'm basically just threw one in here. You could even choose ones where you could press buttons for the different scales. This has 2 mults, so you could duplicate signals in case you want to send Maths here and here and here. You have a trigger generator, and you have a VCA, a dual VCA. VCAs are really important. You're going to find out that you want more VCAs. It's probably going to be the first thing that you realize that you want more of when you expand your rack. The total new MSRP price for this is $1,331. Used price, I would say about $1,050. For this, I'm calling, for lack of a better term, Alien Machine, and it will just create a bunch of crazy sounds that you typically can't create in a DAW or on standalone synthesizers. This is just sort of, I'm diving into modular, and this is why. If you like noise, this is going to create a bunch of that too. You have an O-Coast, which is, they make an O-Coast that is your rack mountable. This is a mult. This is 2 mults, 2 different mults. This is a Maths. We already went over that. And this is a portable version of Clouds. Clouds is open source, so you could find a lot of different versions. And this one will fit into, how big is it? 8 HP. That's pretty good. The controls aren't as fun to twist the knobs, but you're saving a lot of space. And then this guy right here is the Disting MK4. Disting MK4 is, oh my god, how many algorithms does this thing have? I just got it, and I'm in love with it, and it took me forever to get it. I've been looking for it for a while. It has something like 67 different algorithms that you can run in it, and it does so many things. It almost does every single thing that the rest of these do on its own, or at least like single functions that the rest of these do. So it's just a really awesome Swiss Army knife of a module. And again, this all fits into the Happy Ending kit. This is the most expensive of our examples, and this one, the MSRP, $1,1300.76. Used, I'd say $1,100. The one big issue that you're going to have is finding a Disting MK4, just because they're making them a lot slower than people are buying them. So keep a lookout for that. If it's a module that everybody should have anyway, but if you find one, you should buy one. I swear I'm not stoned. I have something in my eye and it's driving me absolutely crazy. Okay, so this is my case. This is how I started building it, the current case that I have. You can tell I initially used, here's my dog, hi. I initially used thin wood, and I decided that thick wood would be better. I initially wanted kind of a lightweight case, and I decided to make a bigger, heavyweight case. So this is the plywood I used to initially make the case. I used these rails that I cut and just used some module plates as a reference. There's another one. Yay, see, not a complicated thing at all. It's a very basic wood build. Then I mounted this rack into here. It's just this old rack that I sort of took apart, and this is just for like effects or power or whatever I want down here. I ended up putting a drawer down there. That's my car. Yay. Okay, this is after the first stain. I stained it a couple times. Kind of miss my old garage. Had a nice wood shop in the back. This is a custom front panel that I made. There's me pointing my phone at it. Yeah, I just had it laser cut. And there is kind of, it was pretty dirty and had sawdust all over it, but this was sort of the final, almost the final version without power before I put power in. And I didn't put power in for a bit because I was waiting for a power thing to come out. So this is it in with all the modules in it, some of the modules in it, and this is it today in the new house. I obviously put power in it, put a power switch in it, and I'm extending crap above here, and then I even have little modules hiding out behind it, not being used, sadly. So I need to update my case. I need to make a bigger one. When I was initially getting into this, I couldn't really find a video that was just modular for dummies, or just a basic, here's what you need to do if you want to get into modular, and here's why you should, and here's why you shouldn't. I just saw a lot of debating on forums and, you know, things that I wouldn't trust to spend money on, or especially with power requirements, because I don't want to spend money on something and then burn it out. And so I was really scared of that. I found out that it's a lot easier than I thought it was. And then also that on the other end of things, I found out that like DIY is actually really, really tough if you want to design your own modules and synthesizers. It's not as easy as, you know, just reading an instructable and then making a module. It's a process. So if part of you is considering getting into modular synthesis, or if you're on the fence about getting into modular synthesis, I hope that this video created a bridge to a more informed decision. If it did do that, you should definitely subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with any questions or things you want me to cover in the future. Bye.